Hello again, my lovelies, and welcome back to Through the Eyes of Enji, where we're looking at covering 101 films in 365 days to raise money for the Shawbury Village Players, and we are with you. Now, today's a bit of an oddity, because I was going to be looking at the two popes, but the more I was working on it, I started getting into the territory of Oscars. So I thought I'd also cover another film that I've got coming up in one of my 5 film reviews, which also has a lot of tie-in with Oscars, and I wound up talking about Gone with the Wind. So, to start off with, The Two Popes. Released in 2019, directed by Fernando Meirelles, written by Anthony McCartan, starting on Anthony Hopkins as Pope Benedict, Jonathan Pryce as Jorge Bergoglio, and also Pope Francis, Juan Minuin as a young Jorge Bergoglio, and Luis Gnecco as Cardinal Hummus. Behind Vatican walls, the conservative Pope Benedict XVI and the future liberal Pope Francis must find common ground to forge a new path for the Catholic Church. This was an interesting one, watching it, because the more of the film I watched, the more it felt like a play. Felt like two very distinguished actors who were working through scene after scene based entirely on dialogue and their acting ability. Now, there are parts of the film that are slightly more than this. They are specifically flashbacks to George's, and I'm aware that I'm pronouncing these hilariously badly. A lot of the flashbacks to Jonathan Pryce's character in Buenos Aires, when he was a young priest bishop working with the military during a time of instability. But the majority of the film is based in scenes between Hopkins and Pryce, and it's Pryce's film. As Anthony Hopkins is a very talented actor, he always has been, but Jonathan Pryce steals the entire film. He is a much warmer presence. He's a much more compelling presence to watch out of the two of them. And he's been a great actor for a very long time. But this was one of the first films that I really started to appreciate Jonathan Pryce's skill as an actor. And the film it's surprisingly funny. It's a very light film. It's a very easy to watch, enjoyable film. It's not a light, sparkling piece of entertainment like, say, Enola Holmes was, but it is very light comedy. It is funny. And obviously, given that we're working predominantly within the Vatican and representations of the Pope's own residence, the set design is incredibly lavish. These are beautiful sets that have been put together. And yeah, the Two Popes is a 2.5 hour film. It's very light and enjoyable. You don't need to be Catholic to watch it and enjoy it. If you are Catholic, then I imagine it could prompt some reaffirmation in your faith. And if you're like me, where I was raised Catholic but I no longer practice, it won't make you question the faith that you've left behind. And if you're an active atheist, then it's not going to offend you. It's a nice, light, enjoyable film that's incredibly difficult to review, because there are going to be a lot of supporters of Pope Benedict who won't like the film because of its depiction of him, and also the depiction of Pope Francis as being a complete polar opposite, and vice versa. There will be supporters of Pope Francis who won't like the position how he and Benedict are played against each other. And something I kind of thought about whilst watching the film, particularly in what I think is the first proper conversation between the two of them as they walk through the Pope's gardens, is it felt very much like Netflix Oscar bait. Now, given it's around the corner, we should probably, before I started looking at the term Oscar bait, we'll give some considerations to the Oscars themselves. Now, we're probably all aware at this point of the glitzy, extravagant show itself, with the 2 odd hours worth of watching the red carpet and discussing what people are wearing, and Hollywood's elite congratulate each other in a disgusting display of we are the few, we are the mighty. But sometimes there's more going on beneath the hood with the Oscars than people realise. I mean, I certainly didn't really contemplate for a long time how the nominees are actually chosen. And the answer is, of course, that of the 8,000 plus Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science members, they vote for nominees based on their particular field. So actors will nominate actors, directors, etc., etc. And then everyone gets their votes on the Best Picture award, which is slightly unusual because it does use a preferential voting system rather than just nominating the one winner. So you put down your favourites from 1 to 10, and that's how they calculate the winner. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is not only because the awards themselves are coming up, but it could be argued that the two popes is Oscar bait. Now, this isn't unusual given this time of year, and it's doubly not unusual because Netflix, I think, has been pushing for this for a little while now. As when they were making TV shows originally, their own TV shows, they decided to push to win an Emmy. So that instead of just being the streaming service that, yes, once upon a time used to mail DVDs to you, they wanted to be the service that made its own prestige drama. And whilst I don't think it was the first, certainly the first one I came into contact with was House of Cards, which was the one that really cemented them as their own TV studio. Now, Two Popes coming out round about this time of year, as I said, isn't unusual because you'll notice throughout the year that, as a rule of thumb, big blockbusters come out in the May July time because that's seen as the time when people can go to the cinema more as we enter various holidays. And then August, things tend to go a bit dry. It's referred to as a dumping ground for a reason, much like January is as well. And for example, the Fantastic Four remake that I reviewed a few weeks ago was released mid-August because it was felt it wasn't a particularly good film. It wasn't going to get great numbers. A lot of people are outside. They're on holiday. They're not going to go to the cinema. But we still have to release content. So we might as well dump a film like Fantastic Four in August where it's not going to pick up too much traction and too much criticism because people are going to be looking at other things. And then things tend to pick up again towards the end of the year because this is when the prestige dramas and the like start coming out, partially to ensure they don't miss the time frame for Oscar nominations to be released, but partially also because they'll be more familiar in people's minds when it comes to voting and going to see the films. And granted, keeping it fresh in people's minds isn't a major issue these days because the dirty open secret in Hollywood is that money gets awards. And whilst the nominations themselves mostly tend to be good films, the for your consideration campaigns are what actually get the awards in the end. Now, granted, the Golden Globes are by far the worst offender when it comes to for your consideration campaigns, as the 80-something voters are all known who they are, and so they get campaigned against aggressively and personally. Variety reported a few years ago that the production company behind the latest Sharon Stone film actually sent out gold watches to the voters to try and inspire them to vote for that particular film. They did. She won. The Oscars hardly have clean hands when it comes to this matter. Advertising campaigns are plastered everywhere, both all over America and also you'll probably have spotted them quite a few times online. I've had the Trial of Chicago 7 plastered across my ads board for weeks now. And on average, production companies spend up to $10 million trying to push films for an award. And after all, you have to spend money to make money. And it's estimated that being nominated for an Oscar can gain up to $20 million in ticket sales. And that can go up to 35 to 50 million for a winner. And you know why. And for the record, I'm guilty of this too. Every year or two, you'll say, I want to see all the films that have been nominated. And you make regular trips out to the cinema to try and see them all. And coming back to Oscar bait, these, as a rule of thumb, tend to be films that have been thought up by committee to win based on the trends of recent years. And while these films aren't necessarily bad, some of them are, I mean, have you watched Crash recently? They are very much aimed at what has historically won Best Picture. Okay, check this out. So, looking at the films that have won the most Oscars since 1939, we'll get to that in a minute. With the exception of Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, which its sweep of wins seems to be more of a round of applause for the trilogy as a whole, rather than nominating and awarding the two arguably better preceding films, who ironically won Jack and Shit. With the possible exception of From Here to Eternity in 1953, all of the big winners have either been historical epic dramas, such as Titanic, Ben-Hur, Gandhi, and arguably The English Patient, or they've been musicals. So that was been West Side Story, Gigi, Cabaret, and My Fair Lady. When we look at the winners of Best Picture, again, putting aside Return of the King, there's a definite theme as to which films are nominated and which ones win. And the winners are often not the best of the group. Chicago, Green Book, Crash, Driving Miss Daisy, Oliver, Rocky, Annie Hall. Annie Hall's a bit of a personal dig at mine because it's a perfect example to me of Academy voters going for prestige, dialogue-driven drama over spectacle and entertainment, which is possibly why Annie Hall won rather than Star Wars in 1977. I lied, 1978. 1939 is a year that's actually really interesting to look at, because there were some incredible films on the list that year. Gone with the Wind was obviously on there, Wuthering Heights, Stagecoach, Of Mice and Men, Goodbye Mr. Chips, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Obviously, incredible list of films, but the one that won was the one we're going to talk about, and that, of course, was Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was released in 1939. It was directed by Victor Fleming, George Cukor, and Sam Wood. It was written by Sidney Howard, Oliver H.B. Garrett, Ben Hecht, Joe Swirling, and John Van Druten, and it was based on the story by Margaret Mitchell. It starred Vivien Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara, Clark Gable as Rhett Butler, Leslie Howard as Ashley Wilkes, Hattie McDaniel as Mammy, and Olivia de Havilland as Melanie Hamilton. Now, for those of you who don't know the story, it's about a manipulative woman and a roguish man conducting a turbulent romance during the American Civil War and Reconstruction period. Now, Gone with the Wind, based on inflation and the changing ticket prices, always seems to come up as a film that is for the biggest grossing of all time. I can't imagine what it was like seeing the film for the first time in 1939. And I was reminded of this late last year when the cinemas were allowed to open again. Of course, didn't really have many films to show, so they were showing old films re-released. I got to see Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers and Return of the King extended editions in cinemas again. I also went to see Flash Gordon. And part of me was thinking that same thought. I wonder what people thought when they saw this for the first time. But I was also caught by the card that popped up at the beginning of the film, which is something that's slowly becoming increasingly common, which is the one that says what is depicted in this film was considered normal at the time in society, but would be considered not now. However, for historical purposes, we have held the film in its original state. I can definitely see in Flash Gordon where that was. And there was a big hoo-ha in June last year about Gone with the Wind being removed from the HBO Max streaming service. Now, when this was, well, it was originally called for in an article in the New York Times, and a lot of people read the title and went mad without actually reading the article, which was actually calling for it to be removed at the time, because during the main thrust of the Black Lives Matter marches, releasing Gone with the Wind on a streaming service might not have been the best look. Not to mention as well that it needed a card at the front of the film like Flash Gordon to explain that views in society were different at the time, and trust me, we'll get back to that. Now, the film was a slog to watch again. It's 4 hours long. It is a ridiculously long film, and it struck me. I had a lot of time to think about these things watching it because of the sheer length of the film. And what struck me was there's a lot of criticism these days of films like the Michael Bay Transformers films, where the length of the film and the amount of writers and the amount of directors and the money thrown at it is given quite massive scrutiny. And it's not without precedent, because Gone with the Wind did it too. And what's the film like? The film's long, melodramatic, painful to watch at times. The performances in it, I don't like Vivien Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara, and I wonder if that's because I don't like the character of Scarlett O'Hara. One of the film's three, let's say that again, one of the film's three directors, in question, I think it might well have been, I think it was Victor Fleming, who made the decision to, in his words, film Scarlett's character warts and all. So he presented her as a complete person in his eyes. So she was, as a teenager, she was lustful and bratty. And when she starts growing up, she becomes cold and manipulative. And then by the end, she burns down every chance she possibly has of happiness. And then actually seems to come to realize it by the end, and goes right back to the beginning of being bratty and manipulative. The other characters in it, I think we will have to come back to Mammy, because I'm ignoring the elephant in the room. But, Clark Gable is fine. He gives the impression that he doesn't really want to be there. And if stories are led to be believed, he didn't want to be there. And, you look at Melanie, looks like there's nothing to her. Ashley is just a weird character. The film itself seems to be confused whether we're presenting him as this Southern Confederate hero with his golden locks and the lighting and the swelling of music when he's on. But at the same time, he's kind of an asshole. He constantly gets these approaches from Scarlett, and he always turns it down, but he never dissuades her. Even when his wife's dying in the next room. And I know I've spoken about it already, but I really can't stand this depiction of Scarlett O'Hara. I know I've said about her being bratty, but she whines constantly, and she seems more concerned about her waistline than she does any of the other characters, and the death of her social life is more important to her than the death of her husband. And yeah, okay, fine, I'm sure that it's meant to be done this way, but Vivien Leigh, and she was the final product of a big search for a character to play this role in what is essentially a romanticized ideal of the South at the commencing, during, and after the Civil War. And keep that in mind. This is a romanticism. They've romanticized the shit out of this period. This is not historically accurate. And again, we're definitely going to get to that again in a minute. And before I progress further, at the beginning of the video, there was a trigger warning. And it's about to kick in. So, popping up on the screen now should be a time that you can skip to avoid it all. Okay? Okay. The depiction of Scarlett and Rhett's marriage in the film is something that is often cited as being problematic. So for those who aren't aware, the two of them get married. They have a child. The child dies. Rhett wanted a daughter so desperately, Scarlett, because he wanted a version of Scarlett that he could love as he wanted, not one that rejected the kind of affection he was offering. And it's at the beginning of this scene that a picture of bloody Ashley drops to the floor, and Rhett still realizes that Scarlett is burning that torch. Now, she makes it very clear after this argument she will no longer be sharing a bed with Rhett, and Rhett makes a very aggressive stand of kicking the door open after she says something along the lines of, "My door will be locked." He's, "Oh, that won't be an issue," and probably smashes the door open. And then when he returns later that night, drunk, he overwhelms her, carries her off, and it's and he rapes her. It's a very clear example of marital rape. And if you want, I'm not even going to go into the discussion of the next morning when it appears that she's enjoyed the experience. Because of the Hays Code, there's obviously a lot of this is very strongly insinuated. And if you're not sure what I mean by the Hays Code, can I suggest you go back to the second review I did on Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, where I go into it in a bit more detail. But unlike other films of the Hays Code, which show, with one of the points of the Hays Code was if you committed a crime, then you had to be shown to be punished for it. And I think it's very debatable whether Rhett is actually punished in any way for what he's done. He comes in, he apologizes for behavior, he blames the drink, and he tries to leave, and Scarlett won't have any of it because of the damage it will do to her family. And I can't stand it. It makes me really angry watching that part of the film, because it is a stunningly dysfunctional relationship. It's fucking terrible to watch, and this is supposed to be our heroine and our hero in what is supposed to be the greatest romantic story that Hollywood's ever told. And it's not a romance. It's a fictional drama which glorifies the Confederacy, whitewashes slavery, and this romance that's supposed to be the core of the film is a really dysfunctional relationship, results in horrific domestic abuse and rape by the end of it. And, okay, sure, the film does have a very big scale. There's obviously a lot of money behind it. Okay, the colours are a bit over the top, but Technicolor hadn't long been in place, so I'm not surprised that the colours were pushed more. But this film's got issues. Not to mention the issues concerning the relationship between Rhett and Scarlett. But obviously, famously, there are serious issues concerning race. And this is your second trigger warning. And this is going to go to the end of the video. So, it's become increasingly commonplace to say, in defense of Gone with the Wind, that it's a film of its time, and this will somehow excuse the problems it has. It doesn't. Gone with the Wind was protested when it came out a lot, more so than the likes of Dogma, which had the Catholic Church in a twist before they'd even seen the film. And yeah, as I've said, Gone with the Wind is a very problematic film. It always has been. Saying, oh, the film wasn't so much the problem when it came out in the 30s because that's how things were. No. That's not an excuse. There are protests outside the cinemas saying you'd be sweet too if you were under a whip. I haven't seen stuff like that for a while in protesting a film. And, even if we remove from the discussion the abusive relationships, and if we're still left with a film which romanticizes the Deep South during the Civil War, specifically the Confederacy, who, let's not forget, fought a war because they wanted to keep on owning slaves. And yeah, okay, I'm aware that I'm boiling down a complex area of history to the bare bones, but I didn't want to have a massive discussion about American history when I'm trying to discuss Gone with the Wind, but you at least have to acknowledge this. And for those of you who are heading towards the comments section to correct me, just keep in mind that I do have a working knowledge of Confederate apologists, and I have gone through a number of the arguments in support of both slavery and the Confederate cause, as well as the arguments supporting Confederate actions during the Civil War, who shot first, the legality of succeeding, and on top of that, I've gone deep into the rationale between the continued use of the Confederate flag and the arguments about how it honours people's ancestry and their history. And I can talk about these issues at length, but I want to stick to watching Gone with the Wind. However, just like I always say, that you need to see a film before you criticise it. It would be unfair of me to make criticisms of the Confederacy and slavery if I hadn't done some of the work to understand both points of view. Again, this is a review of Gone with the Wind, not a lecture of America's history with slavery. If you want that debate, then when the floodgates open and we can go for a pint, let me know. We can have that discussion then. Okay, back to the film. On top of everything else we've discussed, the depiction of people in colour in the film, which isn't just problematic, it's also racist. And it was racist when the film was released, and it still is now. And this links in with the previous problems we've talked about concerning Scarlett, who's our heroine, who we follow through the 4 hours of the film, who is an unapologetic slave owner. And once the war ends and she's forced to free her slaves, then she just switches over to free prison labour instead. And, when the slaves are freed, they're specifically depicted to not be resentful towards their own old owners, and indeed are happy and honoured to remain employed by them. And even Mammy is, happiest day of her life is when Scarlett has a child. And not when she's freed from slavery, but when her owner has a child. And the thing that really starts rubbing me up the wrong way is when we have Scarlett's desire to hang on to her plantation and by extension her slaves, and how it's presented as this act of utter heroism alongside the heroic struggle of her Confederate neighbours to defend it. No, you were defending the right to own a person. Glorifying it. I don't think it's the actual depiction of slavery which causes an issue with other people when revisiting Gone with the Wind now. It's more the excusing and condoning which follow it. And while I can't deny that there is just one line in the 4-hour film, that suggests that being a slave owner isn't so bad if you treat your slaves right. And it's Ashley that has that line, by the way. And yeah, okay, sure, David Selznick did cut out the reference to multiple characters going to a KKK meeting during the film. It certainly still insinuates it. And the film does still feel like it was trying to make some kind of case asking for sympathy from the Confederacy of the South. And the film ultimately just whitewashes the horrors of slavery and depicts life on the plantations as this tranquil soap opera. You can see the film as a racist film because the makers of the films are racist, and to not make it this way would be racist. And yes, that is something someone has said to me. Or you can say that the film is a side-eyed critique at the South during this period from the point of view of the Confederacy. Again, this is something else I've heard people say, whilst defending Gone with the Wind, and that particular argument also compared it to Starship Troopers. No, I'm not going there. Now, if you feel that way, then that's fine. You do you. But part of the joy of doing these little independent amateur reviews is I get to throw down my views on a piece of work, rather than try and cover and understand and debate everyone's point of view on a piece of work. And my point of view on Gone with the Wind is pretty simple. It's a historical relic. It is worth conserving because it's an excellent technical example of what could be achieved with the medium of cinema, with the likes of the burning of Atlanta, with whilst again some of the long shots and sunsets are problematic, they are a good show of what could be achieved in film. However, there's a protective aura around Gone with the Wind of its Oscars and its reputation of being this great American classic, which cover up the dark cancer of what the film is and what it represents. And whilst I agree we should conserve it so that we can discuss it, I wish that we could just let that reputation go. Put it on the shelf next to Birth of a Nation, in that rather than idolise it, maybe we should be a little embarrassed by it. And I think there's a fair argument that in some cultural artifacts, like Gone with the Wind, we plant the seeds of bigotry and hate to pass from one generation to the next. And as I say, if we are going to keep watching and promoting Gone with the Wind, then let's talk about it, let's discuss it, let's look at the flaws and identify them for what they are, rather as selling this film as some sweeping, inspiring romance, when the reality is we have these unlikable characters who, whilst they may be anti-heroes and protagonists rather than heroes or heroines, they do whatever they want to get what they want, in a world that shows a shot of hundreds of injured soldiers and it pulls back to show the Confederate flag and just hopes you'll stand up and salute. And with all that in mind, if you don't agree, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.